This is Marcus Whitney's audio universe.
Like, you gotta do the work. You gotta show up and just do the work.
All right. Happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of Marcus Whitney Live. And this is definitely the worst internet week I've had in a long time, but I have a brand new modem coming in soon. So we're just going to push through this final show. But I'm excited about this show. This is one of the first people that I wanted to have on the show when we started this whole live stream thing. My friend Luke Stokes, I met Luke here in Nashville, Tennessee, really from the technology community. Luke is a guy who was an entrepreneur, founder, technologist, so we had a lot in common from that perspective. He had built a company called FoxyCart, which is a piece of software that enabled anyone to pretty easily make their website e-commerce enabled. But then he started kind of going off on this weird Bitcoin thing, sort of before Bitcoin became Bitcoin. He started like talking about it and speaking about it at our local bar camps and stuff. And then next thing we knew, it was like all he was doing. He moved on from FoxyCart. He was into this blockchain space. And the reason why I've continued to follow him is because, he was a guy who had done well in legitimate business. So I knew he wasn't like just chasing money. For him, there was a philosophical reason for getting into the space. There was a technological reason, a philosophical reason. And he's been the person that's helped me best understand why Bitcoin and the derivative blockchain movement is so important. And I think right now, with everything going on in the world, from a financial perspective, from a political perspective, having Luke on to talk about that is really, really important. So I'm excited to have him on the show. And Luke, say hi to the folks.
Thanks so much, Marcus. Really, it's an honor to be here and to share this time with you and talk about this stuff. It's really a funny situation where you're just super passionate about something and you're kind of off in this weird realm where people are like, what is this guy talking about? And then here we are, 7.5 years later, and people are like, oh yeah, that's like a thing. And maybe that's important. I remember, like you said, a bar camp thing in 2013, talking about how Bitcoin is going to be more disruptive than the internet. And that's a really bold claim. And now people are starting to go, wait a minute, yeah, this is really disruptive. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the things where I want to start is some of the terms that I saw you using that I didn't see anyone else who was talking about Bitcoin using early on. So most people were talking about, distributed ledger. They were talking about the fact that it was ungoverned money. It would enable freedom for people to transact privately. There were sort of all of these aspects of Bitcoin that most people talked about. And then, of course, there was the trading and making a lot of money and the prices going up. I heard you using words like voluntarism, talking about fiat currency, talking about the fact that the money that we use today is largely backed by militaries. And so you sort of took that position consistently, and even today still talk about that. Can you just talk a little bit about money and what Bitcoin really solved when that white paper and that initial implementation of blockchain came to be?
I love it. It's my favorite thing to talk about when we talk about Bitcoin or blockchain or anything in this space. It's the idea that essentially it taught me something about how humans can interact that I didn't think previously was possible. There are certain things, certain assumptions that we grow up with. You need government for this, you need government for that. And, when I started looking at the technology, at first it was, 2011 or 2010. I was like, fake internet money, that's not going to work, right? You make money off your computer, that's silly. But it was towards the end of 2012 when I saw actually the hacker collective Anonymous tweeting about it, and they had a Bitcoin address on their Twitter handle. I was like, well, those guys aren't stupid. If they're actually using this to fund, I'm not saying I agree with everything they do or represent, but it got me thinking. So I went down this deep dive of looking at it, and I started realizing, wow, I mean, if this is real money. In 2013, I made my first purchase. I spent $50 and I got 2.5 Bitcoin, which is not a bad investment. So that obviously piqued my interest. and then the crazy run up in 2013, we started a Nashville Bitcoin meetup, and I started to realize this is actual money without government. And I started going, well, why have I always believed that you need government to do money? What else do I believe you need government to do? And that's when I started learning about voluntarism. Really, people misuse the word anarchy, especially today. There's a lot of that word being thrown around. And that word actually means without archons, without rulers. And it's essentially the idea that human beings can rule themselves. They can self-govern, that all human interactions should ideally be voluntary. Now, that's very lofty to say, but building systems that actually are equitable and reward people based on meritocracy and all these other things that can protect those who can't protect themselves. All these things, they become like, is that even possible if you don't have a ruler, right? The Hobbesian Leviathan, somebody's going to come in and tell everyone how they're supposed to be. But when I started seeing money, something as important as money, we spend 8 hours a day plus away from our kids, away from our spouses, away from our families to go earn this thing. And most people don't even ask the question what it is. So I went down the deep dive of what is money, late 1700s, learning about central banking when that started, learning about, 1913 Federal Reserve Act, learning about, the 1933 executive orders. You couldn't even own gold. They made that illegal in the United States. Most people don't know that whole period of history. Learning about Bretton Woods and what that was and how that impacted the entire world.
Can we stop there? That's a really important one. So can you talk about Bretton Woods? Like what happened at Bretton Woods? What is Bretton Woods? That's an important one.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's essentially, imagine the world destroyed. It's end of World War II. Everything is destroyed. But you have this one country that's quite powerful that didn't get destroyed. That'd be the United States. And they come in and say, okay, the world reserve currency, there were 6 world reserve currencies prior to that. And it was the sterling pound in England. Well, they got destroyed. So the United States comes along and says, hey, we're going to make a bid for becoming the new world reserve currency. And they pulled it off via Bretton Woods. And they essentially said, okay, all your currencies are destroyed. All your economies are destroyed. We got an idea. Send us all your gold. We'll put it in Fort Knox. We will create a currency that's backed by gold, this new world reserve currency. We promise you that we will send you physically the exact same gold bar that you stamp, that you send to us. If you request it back, we'll send you the exact same one. And all you have to do is peg your currencies to our currency, and we'll solve the world's problems. And it was on the surface, the world's in turmoil. Seems like a very, consistency thing. It's like, yeah, okay, maybe the world needs this, right? Turned into potentially one of the largest global heists of financial value the world has ever seen. When Germany and other countries were like, okay, we'd kind of like our gold back, it was like, give us a minute. And it would take like 8 years. And then they get back bars that weren't even theirs. And then people are realizing, wait, is there any money in Fort Knox at all? Is this even backed by gold? And then it leads into another really significant moment, which is 1971, the Nixon shock, where Nixon basically said, yeah, the US dollar, this thing you all trusted in across the world, because Vietnam is really expensive and stuff, we're not going to peg it to the gold anymore. It's just now fiat. And that word fiat, if you haven't heard it before, it means money by government decree. There's nothing backing it. And there's been, hundreds of fiat currencies, many, many hundreds of fiat currencies. And the average lifespan, this is back when I did that presentation in 2013, is 26 years. So essentially, fiat currencies don't last very long. And as of 1971, the United States has been on a fiat currency. They broke away from the gold standard, and they're basically just saying, hey, it's kind of whatever we want. And now you get modern monetary theory and all these other economic ideas that come into place. And people are like, can you really just print money out of nothing? And it got me thinking about really the nature of financial value itself. And these are the type of questions that cryptocurrency got me really asking hard, like, what is money? And I started realizing it's essentially shared storytelling. It's a group of people, and this goes back to, as I started studying the history of money, tally sticks and shells and rocks with holes in them, all these different mechanisms for money. And it's really just a group of people, communities saying, we actually believe this is valuable. And if you believe it's valuable too, we'll agree to trust each other. It's a ledger, essentially. We'll put entries in this ledger. You'll get a couple tally sticks. I'll get a couple shells. You'll get a couple pieces of paper with dead white people on them, whatever it is, right? And you get this situation where you get a shared understanding of value that is really just a myth. It's really actually storytelling. But as long as everyone believes the story, it works. And it's the second the story breaks down, that you start to see increasing in violence. You start to see all these things. I mean, we've seen it in Venezuela, Argentina. And then when you dig a little deeper and you go, okay, who's funding all this war we see in the world? Then you start to look into like, all wars are bankers' wars. You might even get to some Smedley Butler and understand, war is a racket. He's one of the most honored military generals of all time. And reading his speech is really phenomenal. War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. And you start to realize he's like, the only difference between me and Capone is that like Capone, he owned Chicago. I own 3 continents. And this is this guy that's just open about his role as a military leader in the United States and what that meant from a global economic perspective, and really just a bunch of thugs, essentially. People that were using violence and the control of value itself to dominate reality. And so that's where I got excited about, if we can have a story of value, a ledger that is completely trusted in an untrust, like you don't have to trust the actors. It's basically physics and math. It's technology that can't be destroyed or distorted. It's immutable. It has all these amazing properties to it. That got me thinking, oh my gosh, if this is possible, what else is possible?
So you have been on this journey sort of into blockchain as a system that can enable these decentralized economies, communities, exchange of value. Sort of the story is the trust in the system, ultimately. Where is that taking you to today? Like where are we? I'm talking to you. Where are you right now?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. It's fun to think that, what I believe I'm doing with my life is actually beneficial to the things I believe, and it beneficial to my 3 kids, my wife. Like I'm trying to create a world that we all want to live in. And I as you said, I sold my business back to my business partner in 2018, January 1st. I started just full-time consulting in this space because I was very excited about the potential. And so part of that was, first, prior to that, there was a blockchain called Steam, and they were doing social media in this same way, decentralized social media in a way you couldn't be censored, you couldn't be stopped. Everything that you post, you get to control your own content. And they would build in a rewards mechanism via cryptocurrency. And so I started earning cryptocurrency, ended up becoming what's called a block producer or a witness on that blockchain. And those are just basically people who are elected in that particular system. There's different, what they call consensus algorithms for how these blockchains work. Some, you might have heard proof of work. That's what Bitcoin, Ethereum, some of these others do. There's also proof of stake. There's also delegated proof of stake. So it's kind of like almost like a democratic republic situation where you vote in block producers that you trust and they validate the network for you. So I started getting paid doing this, and I started really diving into this idea of, wow, and that was back in 2014, 2015, 2016, even the debates in the Bitcoin community between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash.
So really quickly, I want to clarify something that I understand, but I know it's likely listeners and viewers may not. So Steam is a blockchain, and that blockchain enables people to join, just like Facebook or Twitter, and engage in social media. It's a social media network running on a blockchain. Mm-hmm. But as you post on the blockchain, right? You can be compensated or rewarded, and you correct my terms if I get this wrong, okay? Because you're the guy who's like lived on Steam.
No, you're on it. You're on it.
But as you post, you can be compensated in a particular type of cryptocurrency that is only coming out of that one blockchain, right? And so what's so different about that is on Facebook, we all post for free. And in fact, we pay to get our post distributed more broadly.
Yeah.
We pay Facebook in order to reach more people, right? On Steam, you post and you get paid in this cryptocurrency called Steam.
Yes. And what I want to really highlight here, which is really important, is that I am not involved in whatsoever in any way on Steam anymore.
Yeah,
I'm
but we're just talking
Hive,
about,
which is interesting. And the reason I bring this up is it was an amazing example of how you can deal with governance issues within these environments. So in this particular case, we won't get into all the details, but there was a situation where that community got attacked by a very wealthy person who had 20% of the tokens, and they basically broke the governance and started censoring people and doing things you're not allowed to do. And the beauty of these voluntary systems, this what gives me so much hope for humanity, is that it's completely, anyone can show up or not, depending on where they want to contribute. And so that whole community essentially took all the code, all the blockchain, and they basically, what's called a fork, they created an entire copy of it called Hive. And you can go to peakd.com or hive.io, or hive.blog, and you can see it today. And they just continued, and they left the attackers in the dust. And essentially now this Steam blockchain, and again, I call it like Steamtron. It's not even a blockchain. It's actually a just a centrally controlled system. So it loses that distributed ledger property. It's no longer distributed. The governance isn't distributed. And it's an amazing example of where kind of the first layer of security on these blockchains are actually the human beings that, again, believe the story of shared value. So they come in and they say, we don't believe Steam is upholding that value anymore. So we're going to move over to this other thing. And I kind of say, this is just Steam renamed. It's really the original, intent still applied. So it's a beautiful example. And yeah, just exactly like you said, is perfect. There's basically what's called voluntary inflation. The economics of the system, unlike what we have today in our system where, people talk about audit the Fed and look at the Treasury. It's like, we don't get to have any say in how much money is getting printed. And that's really theft. As you start to understand money, inflation that you didn't have a say in is stealing from your value. It's making everything you have less valuable. And it's just the ability to control inflation and interest rates is another very deep topic we could dive into that really amounts to a version of powerful people controlling those who can't, defend themselves. And it's really horrific. It actually impacts the poor more than most. And it's really, really frustrating. And so the idea of a voluntary inflation and a mechanism of governance that those who have skin in the game can participate in and say, hey, we think the inflation should be this or that. Those new tokens that you get rewarded when you participate in that system are part of that inflation. So I just did not to spend too much time just on that, but I got really excited about that, and I from there I started thinking beyond just Bitcoin. Prior to that, it was just like, it's just Bitcoin and everything else is not worth your time. Right. And there's still many people who believe that. And I'm not going to say they're wrong. I think there's a wisdom in that. Bitcoin was the original solution that I think is still relevant today. And I could honestly say thousands, and that's scary, but thousands of projects outside of Bitcoin that are just not worth your time, that are in some cases straight up scams. So right. I appreciate that and respect that. But it started thinking about, well, you couldn't actually build this technology on Bitcoin. It's if you had to wait an hour for your post to show up or your like or your comment, that wouldn't work, right? This is 3 seconds, it's updating. And then as I got into that, I started thinking about these ideas of what's called a DAC, a decentralized autonomous community, or a DAO is another term that's familiar, decentralized autonomous organization. And I started working with a group called EOS DAC. I've been working with them for a couple of years, and they're on another blockchain called EOS. And they were even more performant, more ability to build interesting systems for freedom and self-sovereignty. And I got excited about saying, well, what if in the future, these entrepreneurs that you and I talk to all the time, what if they don't go build companies, but instead they build communities? And they build them in such a way that they don't get to own or control them. The communities with stake in the game who start to add value get to participate in the governance.
Yeah. So Luke, I want to just, this point is so important for this moment in time, right? And let me say why, right? Because we started with an event, and it feels almost unfair to say it was a single event, but I think it's in the history books, it will be undeniable that the murder of George Floyd will be the triggering event. But we have this event that has busted because it was so empirical. And when you watch it, you have to admit what is going on. You know what's going on. It's very clear what's going on. And that busted open a narrative. It blew a massive hole in a narrative around the idea that we have equality in this country, okay? And that then takes the narrative back to, okay, well, we got to deal with America's sin of slavery, right? So that's kind of where the conversation is right now. We're back there now. We're like all the way back there. And one of the things that is so difficult about saying we're back there is people are trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? What action do we take? And I can't wrap my head around how you, I honestly can't. I cannot wrap my head around how you resolve this debt. I can't wrap my head around it. I just can't, right?
I mean, it's so pervasive. It's so involved. I mean, everyone's been thinking about this the last few days. It's like, how do you, it's not just a lifetime, it's a generation of systemic, it's generations. It's just been on and on and on.
It's everything that's here. Everything that's here is based on that, right? And so that's why I want to go to, like, you don't live stateside anymore. Like, you live in a controlled territory of the United States of America, but like, talk about like where you live and that you basically operate day to day on blockchain. Because like, to me, that as a case study, you're an early adopter, you're a technologist, you're able to do things, and you're actually fighting for this to be something more usable, which we're going to get into. But you are, if I understand it correctly, you're living on the blockchain basically, right? I mean, like, you don't live in the world the rest of us live in, where like everything we do is in exchange of, a government's currency system. Isn't that correct? Am I?
Yeah, no, that's actually, I would say 2018 was my favorite year ever because it was completely blockchain. It was literally like every month I would sell cryptocurrency because my wife would tell me what the bills are for the month. Obviously that's not sustainable. So eventually I had to change that up a little bit. And so, as you said, my family and I have got 3 kids. We moved to Puerto Rico because of the tax benefits. And a lot of people think, oh, well, you just, want to just save some money and, you're greedy or selfish. And it's like, no, I actually fundamentally believe that taxation is theft, that service providers should be voluntary. I want roads, I want all these things, but I do not believe they should be backed by violence. I do not believe they should be enforced at the end of a gun. And that's essentially, I had a friend of mine gave a live talk, Pedro, earlier today. And I'm so thankful he went into the history of police. They were birthed out of slave catching. I mean, this is the foundations of these systems that people are just somehow okay with. They're okay with a monopoly on the initiation of force in a geographic region, which is what a government is, and their own enforcers to just basically be above the law. And we see this again and again. And so my perspective is, I don't want to fund that. I don't want my hard-earned dollars via taxation, without my consent, funding war, funding really a military occupation that is the state enforcer system, whether that's on a federal level or the local level. It's not voluntary, and I think it can and should be. I've looked into other solutions, and I've read a bit about this, and I'm again trying to build these solutions that can be more voluntary. You look at the privileged rich people. What do? They have bodyguards. What do they do in the jewelry stores? They have a guy there with a gun. They prevent crime before it happens. And what do the people do who can't afford that? Well, they're left at hey, I just got destroyed. And so they have to call someone to come after the fact. And the person they call puts them at more risk than the person that just attacked them. That's just insane. Whereas if we have a system, and it used to be called Detroit Threat Management, I forgot the exact name today, but they do an amazing job of policing their local neighborhoods, providing services in a voluntary manner that's decentralized. It's not a monopoly on the services, and their record is impeccable. And they actually, for the cops who are actually, if this can be said, good people. I'm sorry, it's a controversial thing to say, but I'm saying if you're willing to take a job that is okay with that and turn a blind eye when your fellow employees are doing these horrific things, then I have to start questioning at some point your character. Like if you're okay with people not being safe every day of their life and okay with the level of injustice that's going on, and basically be like, how can you be trusted if you're okay with injustice, right? So there's some concerns there. But what's beautiful is some people have come to get trained by these people because they're so good at de-escalation of violence, so good at dealing with situations in nonviolent ways. And so I want to see systems move towards that. I'd love to see more local communities create their own competing currencies, create their own defense systems, even create their own mechanisms where they can have control over their own lives, self-sovereignty. I mean, no one owns your body more than you. No one owns my body more than me. And that's the foundational point. From there, we can get property. It's myself in the past. It's work that I did. And from there, we can start building these philosophical principles of liberty. And I think that it all hinges on money. And I know that's a pretty extreme thing to say, but this is what drives our human motivational psychology system, is how we get food and a mate and all these things, right? It's this storytelling of money. And if we can't take that back, and central bankers do this, they have so much power because they can make money out of nothing. If we could take that back and say, hey, Marcus, you and I could create money out of nothing, wouldn't that be powerful? And if we have a community that believes us and we actually create utility value for the tokenization of that value via the money we create, people would believe the story. And then all of a sudden, You actually have millions of dollars of value that is voluntary. It's amazing power.
Yeah. So I mean, gosh, I love talking about this, and I love the statement that Bitcoin is more disruptive than the internet, and that brings me back to how long it took for the internet to mature to a place where it could actually have real utility. So, you know, my question then leads into what you're doing with FIO, right? Like the thing, I feel like once a year I go, hey, Luke, okay, I'm ready to give this blockchain thing a try again. And you're like, okay, cool. Here's what you do. You do this, you do that, you do this. And I'm a technologist. Like, I've built big technology businesses, like with my own code. Okay. And I go in and I'm like, damn it, this is too hard. Like, I don't have time for this. Why is this so hard? I got to remember this. And it's like, if it's hard for me, I'm like, I can't bring my wife and my kids and my friends into it. And it's like, we got to get this thing easier to do. It's got to be easier to do and easier to understand. And so you're working on that. So talk about FIO, like what that is, and yeah, please.
Thank you. And I completely agree. I mean, I have a computer science degree. I'm Ivy League educated. I know this stuff, and I'm like, holy moly, this should not be this hard.
It's so hard.
So difficult.
Yeah.
And it's normal. It's literally a physical reaction people have. And we actually surveyed a couple hundred people within Foundation for Interwallet Operability. We surveyed 1,000 people in another group, and they all say the same thing. This is very difficult to do. It's very stress inducing. People have lost money, man in the middle attacks, using the wrong address, all these different situations. And so one of the things that as I was consulting, I found out about is this project where they're saying, well, let's eliminate all the public addresses. So this big, long, crazy hashes, that crazy thing I saw on that Twitter handle so many years ago, get rid of that and just have, for example, Luke@Stokes, kind of like an email address, really straightforward, really simple. And it would work for any blockchain, any cryptocurrency. So there are thousands and thousands of projects, thousands of different things out there. And all I'd have to remember is Luke@Stokes. But it's not just that part. That's just the naming part. The other piece that we call a FIO address. The other part would be a FIO request, because in the real world, you don't just like have money show up, right? It's always an invoice. There's always a request for funds. Hey, we just spent lunch. Can you send me some Bitcoin, whatever that might be. And facilitating that, making it as simple as PayPal and Venmo is really important. And then the other part is FIO data. So some of these chains support metadata, some of them don't. So making that homogeneous across all those experiences. And that way you could put like an order invoice. So of course, my background with FoxyCart and doing a shopping cart company, thinking about, I go to a website, I say, hey, do the FIO request to Luke@Stokes. I want to pay in Bitcoin. And it pops up right in my wallet. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, here's all the details. There's exactly what I want. And I know it's going to the right person. Boom. And I just send it. And it's super simple. And anyone who's been in the blockchain space who gets to experience a FIO request and the whole workflow,
I did.
It's really
thank God.
Oh, it's awesome.
Thank God you did that little trick where you were like, I'm going to give people money to do it. I was like, okay, Luke, you got me.
Yeah, it was fun. I was just giving away a few bucks a piece to just have people try it out. But once they do, they're like, why hasn't it been this way the whole time? And what's important to me is that it's the technology had to get to a point where you could support something like this in a decentralized way.
Yeah.
So FIO is just a nonprofit Cayman entity, but it's the blockchain itself is actually run by, we now have 31 independent block producers. It is fully decentralized. I'm the managing director for this entity, but I can't control anything. The block producers will run whatever code they want. They will make whatever changes they want, but we've just standardized the process. We have this FIP, the FIO improvement proposal process. And we have all these different governance. I had a great call earlier today with some experts in governance, and we're doing so many cool things to make sure this doesn't become another Google, another Amazon, another Facebook, a totalitarian, top-down, technocratic, government, basically.
Right.
We have to keep it decentralized in a way that everyone who participates and has skin in the game has a clear mechanism and path for being part of the evolution of the protocol. They get to participate in governance. And so it took a while for the technology to get there. And the team, DAPEX, the main service provider for the foundation, has been working on this. They've done an amazing job. The block producers we have is incredible. And my hope is basically kind of like you see in Africa and other places where they just leapfrog the hard lines. They go right to cell phones.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's what's going to happen. People will just leapfrog the traditional public address system, and they'll take their business and say, I can go right into cryptocurrency if I can just give every one of my customers a FIO address. And we reserved a bunch of domain names for these large businesses. So when they're ready, we're waiting for them. We have 125 million tokens designated just for free address giveaways.
Wow.
So we're going to be giving away these addresses to people so they can experience this. And also, it's like you mentioned earlier, you kind of alluded to, the internet was around for 10 years prior to the HTTP protocol coming out. And there was like no usability layer. You didn't have the World Wide Web or web browsers. And once that happened, if you look at the adoption curve, it's like just went through the roof.
Right.
And I think here we are 10 years later, and we're starting to have that experience with blockchain, with FIO protocol.
Man, that was the fastest half hour I think I've ever done on this show, dude. So listen, we're gonna have to do a part 2 and maybe a part 3. I'm like honestly, I think this could actually be a series because, and it's just why I love staying in touch with you. Thank you for maintaining this friendship, man. Because I'm just lucky that you were here in Nashville, and now like you're the managing director of potentially the way that this thing is going to become usable finally. And I have this strong gut feeling that if we can find a way to make this whole thing accessible to people, I understand it all. I did all the altcoin stuff. I made some money. I lost some money. I had the Ledger wallet. I did enough to be able to keep up with you in these conversations. And I also did enough to know how far away that is from the everyday person, right? So I have a real interest, especially right now when it is clear that some of the issues we have in society are going to require entirely new ways of thinking about them. We cannot continue to expect the exact same systems to give us the justice, quite frankly, the reset button. In some ways, we kind of need a reset button where we can, I just before this, I watched this YouTube video of this woman. I think her name was Kimberly Jones, and she made the analogy of what we've experienced the last 450 years in this country to monopoly, where for 400 years, if every year was a round of monopoly, right, one person made the other person work for them and give them all the money, right? And so they had a 400 round lead. And then for the 50, and then they said, okay, now you can play and you can work and you can have it. But if they didn't like the way they did anything, they just sent them to jail and took everything that they had, right? Which is Black Wall Street, which is Rosewood, right? And so she's like, it's like the Monopoly game sucks. The game sucks, right? And you have to have some kind of radical change to the game. It cannot be, incremental, small change. Like, you got to rethink the game. The game has some fundamental issues with it, right? And we got to be able to finally say that. So for me, you're a person I want to bring on this show again and again and again, and I want to keep digging into this, and I want to track your progress with is it FIO or FIO?
FIO. I say FIO. Some people say FIO.
Okay.
It's both, but I absolutely would be honored, Marcus, to be on your show again. I so appreciate what you do for your community, what you do for the technology industry, and your passion to kind of get these conversations going. Because it really is. You're exactly right. My favorite, Buckminster Fuller quote. You don't fight the existing system. You out innovate it by creating a new one. You make the old system irrelevant, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. Create new systems with cryptocurrency, blockchain, these distributed ledgers, technologies that are enabling a voluntary society in a way that these injustices that we see all around us and are becoming plain as the nose on our faces, we can build a system that makes that system irrelevant. And that's realigning motivational incentives. It's a new game, just like you said. And it's a game that's more equitable, more meritocratic, and also I'm hoping just more efficiently using this technology that we have to create better systems, better worlds, so we can actually do really, really cool things. So definitely looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Awesome. We're going to do it. So thank you, Luke. Everyone out there, I know this fascinating person. You want to learn more about him. He's very, very active on Twitter. That is a great place to follow him, at Luke Stokes. And I've got all of his other information up there, his website, all that good stuff. Please do follow him, check him out, ask him questions. He's great at engaging with people online. So, go check him out, people. My book is coming out June 30th, Create and Orchestrate. It doesn't get into the currency, but it does get into entrepreneurship. It does get into thinking about how to create new systems, about how to not play within the existing rule set, about writing your own rules, about figuring out what your own path is going to be. So I'm could not be more excited about this finally coming out into the world. I feel like the timing is almost divine. This show and many others can be found on my podcast, Marcus Whitney's Audio Universe. That's on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, et cetera, et cetera. And please follow me everywhere on social to keep up with this and every other thing that I'm working on. And that is all the time we have for today. Everyone, it's the weekend. Continue to lean into this moment, to lean into this situation. I think, in the beginning of this year, not the beginning of this year, but the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was feeling like, holy crap, man, this year, it just sucks. It's canceled. And now we're realizing it is bringing a clarity to things and making us appreciate what really matters and fight for what really matters. And so, take care of yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint. But don't give up too soon. We have a long road ahead. So until next time, I'm taking the weekend off and so excited about that. I will see you next Monday with another show here on Marcus Whitney Live.